Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back, Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer. Let's talk about the lunar eclipse in Gemini coming up in a couple of days' time. So a few things to share about this particular lunar eclipse. I'll bring up the chart in a moment. The first thing to, and I say this every time because there are, new people that come on. Some people may be aware of this, some people may not. So it's important to mention every time. So first of all, the first thing is, where did this new moon begin? That is that we're about to have a full moon. A full moon, it's a lunar eclipse, so it's quite potent. It makes it a very heightened force and energy, on the earth plane and in our lives, of course. But in order to really understand what this lunar eclipse in Gemini is going to be highlighting for you, you have to go back and trace where this new cycle began, which was basically 14 days ago. And in Scorpio, we had a new moon in Scorpio at 23 degrees of Scorpio, right? 2 weeks ago. So it's always important when you are working with lunation cycles, just like any other planet or planetary pairs that are beginning a cycle, let's say, it's the same principle with the lunation cycle, except the lunation cycle, which is the sun and the moon cycle, relative to their relationship over the course of 1 month, having a different relationship in relation to the 8 phases, right? It starts at the new moon. Just like, for example, at the end of this year, and again, I will do a separate video for this, we are going to have the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at 0 degrees Aquarius right on the solstice time, which is huge, huge. And that is a beginning of a new cycle. So with any new cycle, we don't know the outcome. It's the process that unfolds, over however long that cycle takes to complete, that will create this process where there is something born, the beginning of the cycle, a new seed is planted, new idea, new project, new moving into a new home, starting a new relationship, whatever it may be. And it is the unfoldment of that cycle that has various points within it that shows us the different components. So, for example, the full moon, which started 2 weeks ago at the new moon, the full moon is the halfway point, right, of that lunation cycle, which goes for 1 month. So the middle point, which we are in now, relative to a full moon, and it is a lunar eclipse, we're at the middle point of what actually began 2 weeks ago at the new moon. You can't separate this. You can't, in my opinion, you can't just look at this full moon and just say it's a full moon in Gemini, lunar eclipse in Gemini. It is that, but it began somewhere. It's not beginning during the full moon. Just very important to remember that when you are working with any planetary cycles for that matter, but in this case, we're talking about the lunar eclipse. So if you think back to 2 weeks ago, where we had the new moon in Scorpio, a way to obviously personalize this and track it in your own life is, first of all, that many of you who were born in November sometime and who therefore, are a Scorpio, or perhaps you have other planets in Scorpio, what you're looking at is, what do you have at 23 degrees of Scorpio? There's going to be millions of people on the planet that have something on that degree. And so for those that have something on that degree, then, this lunation cycle is probably more potent for those particular individuals. If this 23 degrees new moon in Scorpio 2 weeks ago lands in a part of your chart where you don't have anything at 23 degrees of Scorpio, yes, it's still a new moon. It's still landing in your chart, in one particular house. And therefore, it is an opportune time to start something new relative to that lunation cycle. But will it be as potent as somebody who has planets at 23 degrees of Scorpio? Probably not. I wouldn't say definitely not, because I don't think we can dismiss things just like that. But in terms of understanding cycles, planets in the chart, degrees in the chart, it's common sense, right? that when you have something at 23 degrees, it's going to be hit off, isn't it? Quite clearly. If it lands in a house where there's no planets there, then yes, it's highlighting that house, the domain, that area of your life. So if it's the first house, it's got to do with your independence, freedom, autonomy, the ability to self-direct and so forth, right? If you don't have any planets in the first house, it's just going to be a general sort of theme, okay, that brings up those sorts of conditions or desires, you could say, because the first house is ruled by Mars being the Aries house, which does correspond to our personal desires. So let's back up. Where was the new moon in Scorpio in your chart 2 weeks ago? That's going to show us what's really culminated over the last 2 weeks. And when the full moon arrives, which is on the 30th of November, Australian Eastern Standard Time, Melbourne, and 29th of November for the most of you, who live in the Northern Hemisphere, 29th of November. So have a look at where the full moon lands in your chart. Another thing to consider is, for instance, so if you've got something at 23 degrees of Scorpio in your chart, right, and then you've got another body in your chart, another planet or asteroid for that matter, or even point, 14 degrees after 23 degrees of Scorpio, right? That means that the new moon and the full moon are going to hit things off in your chart, even though that 14 degrees distance. So to get from 23 degrees Scorpio, if we add 14 degrees onto that, it's around about 7 degrees of Sag. Now, there's no aspect between 23 degrees of Scorpio and 8 of Sag, but can you see why it's important? It's important because the new moon started where you had 23 degrees of Scorpio planets in your chart, and 14 degrees later, which is 14 days later, is when we have the full moon, right? So the full moon is then going to hit off any planets you have at 7 or 8 degrees of Sag. And this method that I'm discussing at the moment is something that you can apply to your chart with every lunation cycle relative to where the new moon begins, where the full moon arrives, and so forth, right? So just have a think about that for yourself, because there'll be so many of you, that have planets in Scorpio at 23 degrees or close to that degree, and then something in your chart perhaps 14 degrees beyond, right, which is 14 days later. So new moon, full moon, bang, bang. It's a hit, right? Just something to think about, because that way you're really personalizing the energy of this lunar eclipse and new moon that began 2 weeks ago. So what I'll do is just share my screen and just bring up the chart. So this is the full moon chart. I'm just going to get my little helpers here and draw some lines. So there's the full moon. It's in Gemini, and I'm just going to take it straight across to the sun. Okay, so that red line that you can see shows us the full moon. Don't worry about the location of this, because this is drawn from Melbourne, Australian Eastern Standard Time. Okay, so this is showing us that in Melbourne, this full moon lands in the 12th and 6th houses. It's going to be different to the location, obviously, of wherever you are, right? But I assume that what you are working with is not the location of where you are living, but your actual birth chart, which may happen to be the same location as to where you are living. So think about where is 23 degrees Scorpio in your chart? That's where this lunation cycle began 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks later, we have the full moon, which is what you see right here in this chart here. And so the full moon, which is a lunar eclipse, therefore a much more potent full moon. Now, we know every month that full moons really do stimulate the emotional body, right? on every human, really, to some extent. Okay, the full moon always it always amplifies things up. It stirs things up. It stirs the emotional body, so it can cause a lot of reactions. Okay, to circumstances and conditions, because the full moon just heightens our emotional body. Now, this is a lunar eclipse, so we know with eclipses we have solar and lunar eclipses every year. The solar eclipses are quite different to the lunar eclipses, but they're both very, very powerful. You can't say one's more powerful than the other. It's just that the lunar eclipse would really correspond more with your subconscious mind. Okay, it taps into those layers within that we call subconscious, or even unconscious for that matter. And so it brings material up that connects to our subconscious mind, right? So the sun in this picture, which is part of this picture, of course, because a full moon includes the sun and the moon. They have to be opposite each other. That's what creates a full moon. The sun is the conscious component, you could say, of our psyche, our beingness, how we express ourselves, right? So what we have here is we have mutable energy strongly emphasized, okay, because Gemini is a mutable sign, Sag is a mutable sign. And what I want to draw your attention to now, and I find the arrow, is just remove some things. You guys can't see this, but I can. So if you look to the line that I'm drawing, if you can see it with all the other squigglies in between, I've just drawn a line through transiting Neptune, which is in Pisces. Okay, Anyway, you can see what I'm pointing to, right, with these red little arrows. So that's Neptune just there, okay? Neptune, as we know, has been in Pisces for many years now, okay? Neptune's a very slow-moving body. It takes a long time to move through most of the signs. So it's at 18 degrees of Pisces, and it is direct pretty much on the day of this lunar eclipse, which is, quite an interesting phenomenon and not a coincidence. Now, this transiting Neptune that just has gone direct, just as this lunar eclipse lights things up, Neptune in Pisces, another mutable sign. And Neptune is actually squaring the nodes, which are part of this chart and this picture, because we have a full moon lunar eclipse, which means in order to have a lunar eclipse, or a solar eclipse for that matter, we have to have the nodes next to the sun or the moon, or both. Okay, so you can see here, let's see this little, all right, so there's the north node in Gemini, okay, and there's the south node in Sag. These are the moon's nodes. This is what creates a lunar eclipse. It's these are basically imaginary points, if you like, that cut through the ecliptic, which is the sun's pathway. Every planet and asteroid, for that matter, in the chart have nodes, as a matter of fact. But we are very familiar with using the moon's nodes relative to our own birth chart and relative to looking at solar and lunar eclipses. So the nodes is, the dragon's head, as they call it, the north node, which is in Gemini. The south node is the dragon's tail, Ketu and Rahu, in Vedic astrology. Now, the nodes are really important and imply many different things relative to our birth chart, but here we're just looking at them from the point of view of a lunar eclipse. So the north node is always, the direction we are going in. Now, these nodes really speak to the collective, right? So where's the collective heading? We are heading into the world of Gemini, which is just simply new ideas, new ways of thinking, right? So there's a lot of mutable energy going on with this lunar eclipse. Now, mutability is about change. If you were to pick one word for the nature of mutable energy, you would say it's change, changeability, right? And that's a good thing, right? Because it is the mutable element that encourages us to change and to explore different fields, different thinking, just different ideas, different ways of acting on things, and so forth. Fixed energy keeps us more fixed, literally. Keeps us more stuck at times, but also it enables us to be really persistent. Anyway, the point is that this energy of the full moon is just highlighting extreme mutable energy, which mutable energy, when it's not harnessed and cultivated with some conscious awareness, it can become a scattered force and energy, because there are too many directions, there are too many ideas, there are too many different ways of doing things, there are too many different ways of looking at things. And so with the moon in Gemini, which implies curiosity, we have all this incredible curiosity of ideas and plans and things in our mind, of things perhaps that we're wanting to explore, think about, create, whatever it may be. And the problem can be, remaining focused on a particular track, because we just have this enormous curiosity, and curiosity is very healthy, actually. But when this mutable energy, as I said, is not harnessed and cultivated, it can make us very, very scattered, right? Now, the Neptune going direct during this lunar eclipse is quite significant, because Neptune is squaring this full moon, right? And so it's the formation it's creating is called a T-square in astrology, okay? T-square is two bodies opposite each other, as you see the sun and the moon, and a third body squaring both those two bodies that are opposite each other. In this case, the sun and the moon are both opposite each other. Neptune up the top there is forming a square. Squares are always about action, and they are always incredibly dynamic, and they produce conflict as well. The reason they are dynamic and active is because they produce conflict, and they sort of force us, if you like, to take some action relative to certain situations. Because it's Neptune, it is quite a tricky energy, because Neptune is not about action. Neptune actually dissolves the structures and the boundaries and the things that we have created or are even trying to create. So we're working with an energy that does not correspond to taking physical action. But yet Neptune is speaking very strongly to this lunar eclipse, and Neptune's gone direct. So here's what I think. I think that this Neptune squaring this full moon it correlates to what has been going on for you the past around about 5 months while Neptune has been retrograde. And when Neptune is retrograde, it can mean a lot of different things, but as a general sort of level, what it corresponds to is the ability for each of us to tap into much deeper feelings and levels of our unconscious and aspects of truth that reside in much deeper layers in our consciousness. So when Neptune is retrograde, we can, if we do this consciously, at least as best as we can, we embark on a journey where we delve much deeper into deeper emotional states, right? That can take us into very deep material that otherwise is not we're not able to access and is not easily it's not easy to connect to that material. So that's what Neptune can do. So if we think about that for a moment, the past 5 months, in some context in our life, we have been processing a number of different emotions and feelings relative to our life story, our life journey. We've accessed certain pieces of the narrative that is about our soul journey. And now that Neptune has gone direct, it's coming up to the surface to be directed forward, right? So we are moving in a direct motion with transiting Neptune, and whatever we have actually somehow resolved or connected to while Neptune was retrograde, it's now that information is now at that sort of conscious part of our mind or our beingness. So it's going to fit. And so the lunar eclipse will basically highlight that for us. It cannot but not do that. It has to do that, right? So that's one aspect of, in a positive way, the Neptune squaring the full moon. In a more challenging way, relative to the mundane level of things in life, on the personality level, as I frequently reference to, of course, because Neptune connects to ideals and dreams, there can be a lot of disappointment that comes through here. That could just simply come through certain information that you come across, that somebody shares with you, anything of that nature, really, because we're talking about the moon being in Gemini, which is about language, ideas, communication, right? And again, going back to that mutability of this energy, if we don't stop and pause and reflect and try and connect to the Neptune frequency of this full moon from a place of actually trust and surrender, then we are likely to feel quite scattered and confused about what's presenting. Remember, in the bigger picture, what's presenting, I have, absolutely no doubt that it's extremely challenging for, just about every person on the planet, right? There's chaos and destruction everywhere. We know that, we can see that. And it doesn't seem like it's ending anytime too soon in certain parts of the world. And whilst that doesn't seem okay, it is okay because it's on course with the divine intention and with the planetary cycles of where things are at relative to that massive stellium here with Pluto, Jupiter, Pallas, and Saturn, okay, all still dancing around in Capricorn. They're doing the final close, you could say, right? Particularly Jupiter and Saturn, because they are moving quite quickly now and getting ready to ingress into Aquarius, which is going to be the new future in many, many ways. So getting back to this lunar eclipse, whatever started 2 weeks ago from the new moon in Scorpio in your chart, this lunar eclipse, wherever it lands in your chart, it's just simply going to highlight what started for you 2 weeks ago, purely and simply. Again, because Gemini is such a curious archetype, its very nature is incredibly curious. And one positive thing about there's many positive things, but just one positive thing about the moon in Gemini can be that because the moon is a body that corresponds to our instinctual nature, you could say, and a lot of the subconscious components within us and the emotional body. And so it's not a rational body, in other words. The moon it's got nothing to do with being rational, okay? It's irrational, it's the nature of the moon. So in Gemini, the good thing can be that we can bring in the intellect, relative to our emotional states of whatever's coming up for us during this full moon. And we can employ the intelligence of Gemini and bring in some rationale, okay, some intelligence and rational thoughts as to whatever it is that's presenting and that's going on for us. On the other hand, it can also be extremely scattered, just jumping from one thing to the other, right? So it is a good idea during this full moon to intentionally create some time and space to really just step into that Neptune. surrender into the Neptune by letting go of the thoughts, disregarding the thoughts as much as you can, particularly if you are feeling really overwhelmed by the amount of information that's coming through to you, by the amount of ideas that you've got. And see, Mercury was the trickster. So Mercury typically corresponds to people who lie, for instance, right? But Neptune can bring in that quality of deception as well. And in a lot of cases, it's not Neptune really has got nothing to do with deception, but when you bring Neptune through the filter of the ego and the personality, it can come through as deception, because what gets projected with Neptune is the absolute ideal of any situation that perhaps we have an expectation of, or the outcome that we wish to see. And that person and that situation cannot live up to the vibration of Neptune. So it comes through, the way we see it, comes through as, well, that person wasn't honest about who they were. They're so different to who I thought they were when I first met them. Now I'm seeing their true colors. That person was the same person that you met a year ago or a month ago or 6 months ago. They haven't changed. It's just that you're able to see them in truth now, right? But this is the thing about Neptune. It can create this sense of disillusionment, confusion, and what appears to be deception because of what we have ourselves have projected onto a particular condition, situation, life story, person, etc., right? So I'm just saying that with this lunar eclipse, there can be a heightened sense of ideals and dreams of certain things in our life that we feel quite disappointed now, because we're seeing it in a light, full moon lunar eclipse, in a light that is very different to what we saw before. And these points will correspond with where the new moon started in Scorpio 2 weeks ago. So whatever that new moon in Scorpio stimulated in your chart 2 weeks ago in your life, it's going to have a direct link with what this lunar eclipse is going to highlight for you. And so naturally with the new moon in Scorpio, we are talking about purposeful, let's say, intentions and desires of some kind of transformation in our life, right? Or clearing things out, going through a process of purging things. It could just be clearing out your house. I've certainly done a lot of that since the new moon in Scorpio, because I'm planning to move, and that's been another reason why I've been so flat out and just very busy and haven't been able to get this video done up until now, because finding a new house, as most of you would know, can be a very challenging process for various reasons. So so the new moon in Scorpio for me was actually starting my classes, which are going to continue ongoing. And the second class runs this Monday for me, Sunday night for you guys in the US. And so I look forward to seeing you guys in that class. I know a lot of you will be watching this video now. And I'm really excited to continue with classes. The next class will be in January 2021, because December for me is just completely booked out with charts and things like that. But anyway, I guess from my level, that's what the new moon in Scorpio began for me. It began a journey of starting my classes. So the new moon in Scorpio for me was in my 10th house, right? So I look at my own chart, look at where was that new moon. It was in my 10th house. What did I start during that time? It was a big thing I started. It's obviously got a lot more to do than just the new moon in Scorpio, right? But I'm just trying to give you an example, right, of my own chart. So then I would look at, well, where's this full moon in my own chart now, right? And how is it connecting to the 10th house from what kicked off 2 weeks ago? And I can see the story there. The whole story is lighting up for me. So that's what I'm asking you guys to do relative to your own chart. If you really want to personalize this energy and understand what it means for you and what it's highlighting for you, so simply. There is a trine from the Sun to Chiron as well. So that's quite a nice supportive energy, flow of energy in this full moon. and it's fire to fire. Fire is always about courage and initiation, right? The other interesting factor, and then I'll leave it here because I didn't want to make this video too long because I've got a million things to do, relative to work mainly. Before I talk about that, let me just see. Yeah, so the new moon in Scorpio had a conjunction to Juno and Mercury. And Juno, transiting Juno, here she is. Here she is here. Okay, that's Juno, transiting Juno in Scorpio. And see there, she's at 23 degrees. The reason this is really important is because the new moon 2 weeks ago in Scorpio was at 23 degrees. So during the new moon, transiting Juno was around about 19 or 20 degrees of Scorpio. And so because she was there with the new moon, that new moon had a very strong flavor around relationships. So, and of course, you know, Scorpio is about death, rebirth, as we know, transformation, change. It can also bring up, you know, a lot of the darker sides to our own unconscious. It can stir a lot of unconscious shadow material within our own selves that's unresolved, unrecognized, denied, etc. So the relationship content that would have started with this new moon is quite intense, and it would be a lot of shadow material. And so for those that work consciously with their own shadow material that comes up, this is a very powerful transformative lunation cycle relative to our relationships. And so, you know, my mentor said something to me the other day, which we've spoken about this many times, but it's relative to this context. You know, hundreds of years ago, or even thousands of years ago, there were, and there still exist, these types of cultures and tribes that will take their youth, their young, and put them out into the nature or jungle or whatever you want to call it. And it would be an initiation, right? They would have to pass a lot of tests through showing certain initiations in whatever tasks they were given to initiate through. And that, you know, that's a process about helping them become more aware, more conscious, stronger, being able to survive and things like that, right? And so as we've evolved and time has gone on, where we are initiated now in life really is in our relationships. Relationships initiate us in every single way. That's why relationships are so difficult generally. Not all the time and not for every single person, but I think most of us have our fair share of challenges in relationships, right? Because they initiate us in ways that are not comfortable to us. It's not easy for us to do perhaps what somebody is asking of us or is confronting us with, because they are a mirror. You know, every relationship is a mirror. So this new moon really carries this flavor of relationships very strongly with it. And so 2 weeks later, during the full moon, lunar eclipse, transiting Juno is at the same degree where the new moon was in Scorpio 2 weeks ago, 23 degrees. That's not a coincidence, and that's pretty significant relative to the relationship content of what's going on in people's lives at the moment. So it's pretty intense material, actually. That's just something else to consider. The other thing that I wanted to mention is, I guess what highlights this intensity with Juno in Scorpio is we have the lovely goddess Venus, also in Scorpio at the moment, right? Ingress into Scorpio not that long ago. We'll be there for the next couple of weeks. So she's certainly amplifying the process and journey of what this new moon in Scorpio really meant and means for all of us, because then it brings in Venus, which has got to do about our own worth, right? Our own value. And we are, you know, with Venus and Scorpio alone, we undergo a very deep sort of reevaluation of elements that are hidden within ourselves, Scorpio, right? Our deepest sort of fears and resistances, deepest sort of limitations that we have. That's what Venus and Scorpio can really highlight and accentuate as she's, you know, moving through Scorpio. But she's moving through Scorpio with this lunation cycle that started 2 weeks ago, which had a strong flavor of relationships to it because of Juno. And now we're at the full moon part of this cycle, this lunation cycle, and Juno has reached the degree where the new moon began, and Venus is well and truly into Scorpio. So there's pretty intense relationship content that's coming up for people at the moment. And it's, you know, I mean, classically, it's either going to be deeper soul connections for certain people, or it will be incredibly intense conflict for others, or just the absolute ending and death of certain contacts and relationships as well. Because with Venus and Scorpio, she's helping us reevaluate ourselves and what we really want to share with others from that deeper psychic, soul, spiritual, and of course sexual level as well. It's not lightweight material. It's not looking at things from the exterior and making sure everything looks fine and dandy or pretty from the outside. It's nothing like that. It's with Venus and Scorpio, we dive into our soul and into the soul of another, or the soul of the relationship, and we have a look at what's going on, right? So again, full moon in Gemini can bring about the content of a lot of ideas in our mind, a lot of information that will somehow correspond to the new moon in Scorpio. And there can be confusion because Neptune is squaring this full moon. There can be disappointment, but there can also be an incredible process of spiritual download that has been cultivating over the last 5 months while Neptune was retrograde. And so the full moon can really shine the light on that material for you now. And Neptune, because it corresponds to the unconscious components, the components that have no structure or form or boundaries, right? It takes us into the psychic field. It takes us into very, very sensitive field within our own selves. And so it also brings up the notion of dreams as well. And not only the dreams and visions we have about ourselves and life in general, but I'm talking about dreams that we actually have when we go to sleep, which is a very complex subject unto itself. And I've actually done a video on dreams, Neptune, Pisces, 12th house, and I'd encourage you to watch that because it's an extremely powerful video to really help you understand what dreams are really, what they really are about, actually. But anyway, the Neptune here is, during this full moon, is a very, very fertile field relative to the subconscious mind, moon, lunar eclipse in Gemini, mind, left brain, and what we've actually been processing and working on for the last 5 months, and what's going to now come up to be seen, right? Full moon, lunar eclipse. And of course, the sun in Sag holds the conscious component to this, which reminds us of truth. Sagittarius. Sagittarius is about truth and natural law. Okay, and just finally, I just wanted to highlight this. Let me just undo all of these lines. And for those of you that are in the US, which I know a lot of you are, just get out of this. Okay. So the presidential inauguration, which happens the same month, same day every year in the US, which is the 20th of January, and it's so huge. It's so huge what's happening in the US. I know. And happy Thanksgiving, by the way, to all of you there. I hope you had I hope you had some time to just reflect on what you are grateful for in your life, because Thanksgiving is about that, right? It's about remembering what we can be grateful for. And there's many things to be grateful for, even when there is complete chaos going on in the world. This is where we've got to step out of the thinking, the overthinking, right? And this is what this lunar eclipse in Gemini can really distort if we're not careful, if we don't step back a little bit and withdraw from the copious amounts of thinking and ideas. On the other hand, it can be learning to listen to other people's points of view and ideas as well, because there's a lot of, because of the nature of the chaos and the conflict at the moment, it's creating that classic Gemini thing of splitting. People are split in their opinions, their perspectives, on their country, on their nation, on their presidents, on whatever. There's this incredible emergence of division, which is not going to be what's going to create a healthy future moving forward for all of us collectively, not just for the US, but for all of us. If we don't get on board with uniting, and that's what these energies, these planetary cycles, the Earth, she's, and with eclipses especially, she it's like she gives herself a shake. She ruffles her feathers, and that shaking that she does creates these massive sort of earthquakes or ripple effects through the earth, which come through natural disasters or a number of different ways. And it's because she's getting rid of the debris of what the human race has dumped on her. And so if we don't get on board with some sense of unison and unity as a human family, human collective family, we are not going to make our life easy moving forward into the future. And we have to do it. There is a new earth, a new paradigm, a new timeline, a new level of consciousness it's not just going to be born now or be born out of the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction coming up, although that is a huge part to it. This is an accumulation. Depends how far you want to go in terms of timelines. We can go thousands of years back, and we can point it out from the transition of the matriarch into the patriarch. We can bring it closer in timeline and say these energies, it corresponds to an intensified journey and changing process of what's been happening the last couple of 100 years, and then we can bring it even closer and closer and closer. It just depends, what timelines and historical sort of, timelines you want to use, right? But the point is this, that we can become so much more conscious now, not because of what we do necessarily just today, but what we've been doing collectively over a long period of time. But we've hit that critical point that has to take us into that next shift, that next wave, that next level, the next process of evolution that requires creating new consciousness on Earth. And it is always going to come back to unity and love. It's always going to come back to that. If we cannot bring in unity and love, then we are in a place where we have division and ego, personality, selfishness. And we've seen, right, how far we can get when we are not united and when we are just focused on greed and our own power, as it were. And this applies to all of us in however big or small ways that may be. So these eclipses that come up, you know, they just highlight these larger themes that have been there for a very long time, actually. But we're hitting the most critical points pretty much, you know, we could say since really 2019 and 2020 has been massive. And so moving forward, it is actually going to be better. A lot of people don't believe that at the moment, and I can understand why. A lot of people struggle to have that hope because their personal circumstances relative to where they live are so incredibly difficult. And I understand that, you know, it's hard to be super positive and hopeful when the reality before you seems to be crumbling, right? And this is Ceres in Pisces. Let me bring my little arrow back. Where are you? I don't know where my arrow is. Anyway, you see the highlighter? So that's Ceres in Pisces. And this is what I was going to finish up with. On the 20th of January 2021, when you guys have the presidential inauguration, what actually happens is transiting Ceres and transiting Neptune are exactly conjunct on that day. Now, I have to really process that because I only just noticed that as I was coming on to do this video for you guys, and I thought, gee, that feels to me to be very important relative to that presidential date, right? So have a think about that yourselves and see what might get stimulated in your own consciousness about what that could mean. I don't see that as being necessarily easy because Ceres, she's an earth mother goddess, but her story, her pathology corresponds to grief and loss. It is also about renewal, but the renewal cannot come until the death, the loss and the grief is worked through and accepted. And that's really in largely what life it has through it all the time for all of us, you know, in every day, you know, in different little ways and then in much bigger ways as well. So that's going to be a very interesting conjunction on the 20th of January 2020. Okay, I'm definitely going now. And I will see you guys. Just one thing, just one more thing. Esoterically, Venus is the ruler of Gemini. Okay, and if we want to employ that level of connecting to this full moon, then we just bring in love. We bring in love through our words, through our ideas, through our thoughts, through our communication, right? Because very simply put, it is our own ideas and thoughts that get projected onto reality and the world we see. So, in other words, our thoughts create our reality. They literally do. So, if we can change our thoughts and our thinking and our ideas about each other and about the world, and if we can bring that through love rather than division and right, wrong, good, bad, you know, all that sort of personality stuff, then we can have a much stronger chance in seeing, you know, unison and unity. And, you know, every single soul that can do that, it makes a difference. Even though you may think, well, what difference is it going to make me, just one person, if I have that kind of vision? Well, it makes a huge difference, and especially in your own life as well. So perhaps let that be a motivator. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and I'm off. Much love, much blessings. Happy full moon in Gemini. See you guys very, very soon. Thank you so much for your time. Bye.